Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to another episode of Real Talk with Shan and Bilal. My name is Bilal.
And my name is not Bilal.
His name is not Bilal. In fact, it is Shankadeep Chakraborty. And today, we are going to be discussing the news of the day. It looks like we're basically going to be describing two main things. One of them is foreign politics, and one of them is domestic politics.
Breaking news domestic politics.
Breaking news domestic politics, and both of those have crisis or emergency right after it. So first of all, we have the Venezuelan crisis.
Let's do the national emergency first.
No, I'm just describing setting the stage, man. Setting the stage.
Okay.
First one is the Venezuelan crisis, which is basically a conflict between, President Maduro and a potential, alternate president. We'll get to that later. But first story right now is going to be Trump's declaration of a national emergency at the southwestern border of the United States. Now, in terms of the history of the national emergency, it has been used numerous times, and right now we have about 31 active national emergencies, but most of those are stemming in some way to national security, national protection, to the war on terror. What we're looking at right now, though, is Trump using the national emergency for odd reasons. I'm going to pass it off to Sean in just a second, but right before I give my opinion, right now it's safe to say that the reason that Donald Trump has given for the national emergency is that, and everyone's quoting this just because it's really odd, especially if you take in the context that this definitely will be taken to court. He said, quote, "He didn't need to do this, but I'd rather do it much faster," end quote. Basically saying in his negotiations with the Congress regarding, a second second government shutdown, he wanted to have this as its own issue so that he could pass a budget, having a victory there, while at the same time getting his wall funded. What do you think, Sean? What do you think about Donald Trump or President Trump declaring a national emergency at our southwestern border?
So the thing is, this was always on the cards, and I'll tell you why. Why this was always on the cards is because... Wait, I'm gonna keep you there for a second.
Gotcha.
Okay, just because President Trump initiated one of the longest government shutdown, partial or full, in the country's history, that ended, I think it was end of January or beginning of February.
It was if I'm not mistaken, it was like the very end of February, because it's been 3 weeks, right? This is the third week, so it was January 23rd, I want to say, when the government shutdown ended. January 23rd or 25th, 26th, something like that.
Okay.
25th, yeah.
December 22nd to January 25th, a little longer than a month. And it was the longest
today was the deadline.
Days.
Today was the deadline. It was a 21... This is Friday. It was a 21-day government shutdown. That 3 weeks to pass a full budget.
Yeah, so nothing was accomplished, and as a result, they went into a government shutdown initiated because the wall funding was not being given to border security. He initially wanted $5.7 billion. Mike Pence then wanted to negotiate for at least $3 or $4 billion from House Majority Leader Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. That didn't happen. Trump walked out of those talks and said it was a waste of time, and then the government shutdown continued until they signed a new budget proposal that a lot of Republicans didn't like because it didn't include explicit wall funding. Now, in terms of the history of government shutdowns, it has been invoked, and we're going to be quoting a New York Times article about Trump declaring a national emergency for this specific topic. It's been invoked about 6 times, 31 of which have actually remained active to this day, according to the Brennan Center for Justice. Now, White House officials, this is a direct quote from the article, White House officials cited only 2 times that such emergency declarations were used by presidents to spend money without legislative approval, which is what will be happening in this case. Once by President George Bush in 1990 during the run-up to the Persian Gulf War, and again by his son, President George W. Bush, in 2001 after the terrorist attacks on New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania. So these were really national emergencies that were declared, and I think it was safe to say that these were declared with the full knowledge that, something had to be done because they were grave national security concerns.
There's immediate threats. There's immediate threats where immediate action needed to be taken.
Yeah. Now, this is a lot more politically motivated because the wall has always been something that has been on President Trump's agenda since, mid to late 2015 when he even proposed it in his very first stump speech. That infamous, they're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some ISIS people, like that entire rant. So, ever since then, the Democrats have not been on board with this. And the fact that he's going to declare a national emergency on something that's a very partisan political proposal is something that's going to set a really bad precedent. I mean, who's to say that a Democratic president, whenever a Democrat does become president, isn't going to push their own partisan concerns and their own partisan policy proposals via a national emergency, where they can just take the defense budget and just use it for whatever they choose to do, and their excuse will be, well, nobody on the right side of the aisle stopped Trump when he did the same thing in 2019.
And the worst part is, this is like the worst issue to actually declare. This is the worst issue, first of all, and the worst way to do it. So a national, once again, the backing of this, right? Mm-hmm. The justification for this is essentially, this is a major pressing issue that Congress isn't taking any action, and we need to go in and do something before legislation can be passed.
Yeah.
That is the standard line used when you're defending this. First of all, Trump was being a hypocrite, going against that sort of logic by saying, we didn't need to do this, but we ended up doing it. If you didn't need to do this, then what was the point of passing a government shutdown? It just means that, or not a government shutdown. What was the point of declaring a national emergency? It just means you're incompetent as a governor, or and I mean a governor as in one that governs. It makes you incompetent in terms of how you're running the government. If you can't negotiate with the House, if you can't negotiate with the Senate, if you just don't know how to work, then this isn't. That's not a national emergency. That's your problem.
Just to give you an idea of how badly he negotiated, he initially wanted a $5.7 billion deal for 234 miles of steel wall between the U.S. and Mexico in the southern border of the United States. And instead, what he got from the budget deal was $1.375 billion for about 55 miles of fencing.
55 miles of fencing,
That's nothing. That's like 1/4 of what he wanted. And the amount that he was provided for border security in that regard was like 1/5.
Forget that. It's 55 miles of fencing. How long is the entire southern border of the United States? Like, come on. Like, it's so massive, and it's so expansive, and it's 1,933 miles. And he's like, 55, we're good, fam. Don't even worry
Even though
about
he
it.
initially demanded for 234, so I highly doubt that would have done anything as well. And you have to take into account that the U.S.-Mexico border isn't just, it's just a bunch of empty terrain where people just run across. There are a bunch of different, landscapes.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of rivers. There's a bunch of bodies of water.
There's the Rio Grande. There's massive deserts.
Massive deserts. There's just uninhabitable areas all around. And people use those to bypass border security. It's just not sustainable.
The worst part is, the thing that really gets me is that Mitch McConnell privately told the president he would support the move despite his own reservations. Mitch, I don't want the wall, but if you're going to have a national emergency, at least do it in a way that makes it seem like, this isn't going to get immediately challenged in court. The first thing that this is going to, within like a couple months, this is going to end up at the Supreme Court, and then he is going to be royally bodied. And then comes the ultimate question. Is Donald Trump going to ignore a Supreme Court decision? Because once again, it's happened in the history of the United States when, the Supreme Court handed down a decision that President Jackson disagreed with. I think President Jackson said, I think it was Justice Marshall, he said, Marshall has made this decision, now let him enforce it. It could be entirely possible that, they declare, or the Supreme Court declares, yeah, dude, this is not going to fly with me. And then, Donald Trump says, screw you, I'm going to build the wall anyway. Like, then what do you do? Then who is the military, who is the Department of Defense, who is Homeland Security supposed to be loyal to? At that time, I would hope that they enforce the Supreme Court's decision by basically refusing to do what... See, once again, all of it by refusing to do what the president wants, but this is a bunch of... We shouldn't have gotten to this point.
I think the more logical thing he could have done, but I think it would have been seen as weak from his own base, would have just been, okay, you have previous Democratic administrations allotting funds to other agencies of government, such as the EPA or, the Indigenous People Wildlife Association, like those agencies, just a bunch of it. The EPA is the one that I can actually pinpoint. Just give them a bunch of funds, and then they allocate the funds, the agency themselves, without any oversight from the federal government, the executive, legislative branches, about what to do with it, and they do what they want to do with that. Why don't you just do the same thing with the DHS? But he I don't think he's going to do that because that'll make him look weak. You initially went from we're going to build a wall, we're going to do it, Mexico's going to pay for it, to Mexico might pay for it, to we're going to give $5.7 billion of taxpayer money to fund it, and to, and then you don't want the final phase of that promise to be, you know what, we're just going to give it to the DHS, and whatever they want to do with it, they're going to do with it. So it's a really bad PR move for him, and even if it works, I don't think he's going to get, that's not going to reflect in the amount of votes he's going to get. I just don't think it's a smart move.
Like, okay, so do you think that his decision to declare a national emergency is constitutional? Let's look at that. At the most basic level, is it constitutional? Because I don't think it is. Now, when the idea of the national emergency was implemented, it was implemented with with a couple different clauses, and one of those was the idea that if it has to be a pressing matter that the legislative branch cannot deal with immediately. Now, if the House and the Senate disagree with it, then they can take up, what's a joint resolution basically, and that joint resolution passed by the House and the Senate would end the emergency, the national emergency, whatever it may be. Now, before we even go to that, whether or not what the House and the Senate will do, should Trump have been able to pass this? The clear answer is no. Like, so it's not a pressing issue. Action could have been taken. And we know that because he's been campaigning on this for just over 4 years-ish now. It's 2019, so for just about 4 years, he's been campaigning on this idea.
Yeah.
And he hasn't been able to get anything done with it. Now, fine, let's say it's not 4 years. It's been 2 years since he came into office. Or it's been 3 years since he came into office, and then 2 of those years were with a Republican, Congress on his side. So he wasn't able to get anything done then.
Yeah, why didn't he pass this when he had a Republican House of Representatives? Why?
He had a Republican House and he had a Republican Senate. So if members...
And if it was challenged, I mean, he still has this, but a Republican, or at least conservative-dominated Supreme Court, which he had even before Kavanaugh came in, because John Roberts wasn't the centrist. That was Anthony Kennedy. John Roberts would have been right of center. So he had all his aces in the hole, and he still, for some reason, just continued to talk shit on Twitter.
Yeah, okay, if it... Oh my god, the more you think about it, the more absurd it gets, because if it's a national emergency, right? Fine, you come into office, you've been campaigning on it for 2 years, by the time you get into office, just pass it, dude, just pass it, just do what you need to do, right? And then if he did it as soon as he got into office, it probably would have been seen as constitutional, because it's been a national emergency, he's just had the power to address it, he immediately addresses it. But a wall, so that's the national emergency of, illegal immigration. But a wall is not the way you deal with the national emergency, because the wall isn't even going to be start to being built until the end of, for at least a few months. I won't go as far as to say, the end of the year, but at least for a few months, you need to buy the land. You need to either acquire the land through buying it, or you need to have civil asset forfeiture. You need to find someone to build a wall, or if you're going to build a wall through the national government yourself, you need to send down all the resources, all the construction equipment, and everything to do that. And that's assuming that all the border states agree with it. I guarantee you that at least California is going to file some sort of a lawsuit against the national government because they don't want this to occur.
I think the main caveat here that saves the House Democrats here and pretty much negates any effort of Trump passing a national emergency legislation, according to the National Emergency Act to get his wall built, is, according to legal scholar Elizabeth Goitein, I think I'm pronouncing that right, I don't know, it's from a Vox article, she tweeted, it was a chain of 13 tweets, but these two I think were the most important. So her first tweet was, emergency powers are designed to give the president access to stand-by authorities passed by Congress in advance in situations where Congress has no time to act specifically. And the second tweet is, if Congress does have time to act, then there's no justification for bypassing the ordinary legislative process. And that's the main issue here. Yeah. Congress definitely has time to act. They've had time to act for a very long time now. It's always been a political talking point. Ever since. And there have been, border walls, fencing that have been built since the Bush administration. So the fact that, he's going to invoke the national emergency powers just to fulfill a political talking point doesn't really, it doesn't justify him using the National Emergencies Act in order to do so.
Because once again, when you go back to it, the Congress had time to act on it.
Yeah.
So that
So
there's the point.
yeah, there's no reason to bypass Congress.
Yeah. So we can both agree that this is not just unconstitutional, but unconstitutional AF.
And it's immoral.
And it's immoral. Like, it's setting such a bad precedent because as soon as the Democratic, oh my God, I could just imagine a Democratic president declaring the next national emergency, Republicans are going to be up their throat.
Exactly.
That's what really annoys me. There's such hypocrisy going on right now within the modern Republican Party. The Republican Party, as it is right now, so much hypocrisy going on, and just what can we do about it? We can't do anything about it. But we will. I guarantee. I believe in the day that sanity and democracy will return to the United States, but so long as Donald Trump's president, that day may not be seen, unless Robert Mueller just comes out with the chair. Oh my! What that meme that has Donald Trump and he's like on. It's like the WWE and there's Donald Trump and then it's like Sanders out of nowhere with the chair.
Oh yeah,
dude, that's one of my favorite memes of all times. I saw another one, a variation of that on the night of the State of the Union, and instead of Bernie Sanders, it had Stacey Abrams. I love those memes. Anyway, are we done on the national emergency occurring in the United States? If so, I think we should move over to the national emergency, or the state of emergency, basically, this crisis that's happening in Venezuela. So you want to take over that summary, or should I take care of the summary?
So basically,
Sean got this.
do it. Okay. So basically, in Venezuela, there is a national emergency, complete emergency, state of emergency.
It's a crisis.
It's a national crisis in the state of Venezuela, as their economy is completely down the hole. Their inflation rate has risen to over 1,000,000%, which is the highest inflation rate, bar none, in the world right now. Even countries like Zimbabwe and Iran and those countries that have really, really, really high inflation rates don't hold a candle to Venezuela's, and that's because President Maduro has really mismanaged his economy via his socialist regime over the past couple of years. And it's been going on since Hugo Chavez as well. So where Venezuela currently finds itself is in a space where the economy is doing really, really badly. That would actually be an understatement. They're literally eating dogs on the streets right now. And it's an illiberal state of democracy right now, to the point where Maduro has basically usurped the role of the leadership in Venezuela by keeping himself in power no matter what. And in the elections, there was no legitimacy of it. There was no fact-checking. There's no electoral commission to give the elections any legitimacy, and he declared himself the winner on the night of the elections. But what's happened now is an opposition leader, Juan Guaido, I think that's what his name is, he has declared himself as the leader of Venezuela, and he's left of center. He's more prone to capitalist reforms in Venezuela in order to get the economy up and running again, and Maduro has vehemently opposed him and his entire party as a result of that, as a means to destabilize Venezuela, which is the most hilarious thing I've heard in a very long time, assuming that Venezuela is in any way stable right now, if you mean by stable in the sense that everyone is starving and killing themselves on the daily.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a really bad situation right now, and I think where it stems from an economics perspective, is Venezuela under Hugo Chavez basically centralized the economy into becoming a rentier state of oil. When you are so reliant on one key...
I just want to say, Sean, as soon as you finish this point, I'm going to bod the hell out of you. But keep going.
Okay, here we go. So basically, when you centralize your exports, in this case, oil, into kind of... What?
Can I click over to
yeah.
Okay.
Basically becoming a rentier state of one commodity, then you're setting yourself up for failure, because your entire economy is basically reliant on the price of that one commodity. And in the case of, say, 2013, 2014, when the price of oil fell precipitously, then their economy completely got screwed over. Inflation rates were very high in order to pay off their debt, because you have to hyperinflate your economy. And it just kept going and going and going, to the point where, hilariously, I think in 2017, Maduro added zeros to his currency in order to hyperinflate the economy enough to pay off the debts to other countries. So, years and years and years of doing that, and you find yourself in an economic crisis, which has now seeped through into a political crisis.
Yes. Okay. So, here's the thing. if you really want to go to the basis of it, okay? Here's what's been happening, okay? The economic crisis, as it is, right, is due to political, or not political, is due to the mismanagement of the okay. Let me restart that entire phrase over, because that kind of, like, destroyed itself. The state of the economy right now is due to the mismanagement of the government and its finances that started under Hugo Chavez and then peaked under Maduro. So what happened was, in I want to say 2015 is when Maduro took office, right? I'm gonna fact check myself really quickly, but regardless of that, in 2013, okay. And then basically as soon as he took office, right? He takes office in 2013, and the price of oil falls. Now, why the fall in the price of oil is so important is that most of the social plans and social programs of Venezuela have been funded by selling oil and being able to sell it at such a high price.
Pretty much everything. And when you nationalize all the industries in Venezuela, as the Hugo Chavez and then subsequently the Maduro regime did, in an effort to fund social programs socially on the basis of the government and not have any capitalist systems in place of healthcare and all those kinds of industries, that's what you have. You're basically only relying on one commodity, and you're basically putting your eggs into one basket.
Yeah, exactly. So, what you've had is this. The economy wasn't going to be able to sustain itself. As soon as the price of oil drastically changed in any direction, you would either have a surplus of funds because you're making way too much money, in which place you would put it back into the economy, and then if it deflates even a bit, you have a collapse. Or if the price goes down, you have that collapse earlier on. The latter happened. Right as soon as he became the president, the price of oil significantly dropped. So that's why you had the major economic crisis that's going on. A bunch of social programs, a very centralized economy, and the main thing that's been funding those social programs and centralized economy loses a lot of its value. Thus, everything that Shan mentioned. But right now, the biggest problem with what's been happening in Venezuela is that Maduro, instead of addressing the economics of his country, has been allowing this entire political, crisis to fester, and then he's become far more authoritarian throughout this entire saga. So then there's three main things you want to see. First is the effective, removal of the Supreme Court, or the making of the Supreme Court as a non-entity. So there's now Supreme Court in absentia, with the current Supreme Court being, filled with people that Maduro appointed and people that will side with Maduro. That happened roughly in 2016. By 2017, that Supreme Court, that judicial branch, had dissolved what's basically the legislative branch of Venezuela, which is the National Assembly. Now, here's an important thing. They reversed that decision, but it basically said, oh, we can do it, we're just not going to do it right now, because the outcry would have been massive. Yeah. Then, later on in the year, in 2017, Maduro created this new body, okay? And this new body, or a similar thing, has the ability to amend the Constitution. Now, the creating of the body is fine. Hugo Chavez had done the exact same thing, creating of this different body that's not the National Assembly in order to amend the Constitution. The difference with Maduro, though, right, with Chavez, was that Chavez had first had a national referendum to support his decision to create the new body, and then, once the national referendum passed in his favor, he created the new body. The problem here is that Maduro just did it, unilaterally. That's what caused the biggest problem. And then, if you really want to put the icing on the cake, right? All of Maduro's allies won every single seat. They won all 545 seats. So now you have a body that can create a new constitution against this National Assembly. Now, the Supreme Court in absentia has ruled that, Guaido should be the president. So then Guaido got sworn in. And then you had the beginning of this major crisis on.
Right now the presidency of Venezuela is still being disputed with Juan Guaido, because he has basically his presidency has been legitimized by the Supreme Court in absentia, but the fact that it's basically been parallelly functioning with the Maduro administration is what makes it such a dispute.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of the highest question here now is whether or not you know, what should the United States basically do right now? Like, what is the job of the United States? Because we have someone who constitutionally, or not let's not bring that in. That's an entire complex thing. But which a lot of nations, including the United States, has recognized Guaido as the president.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't just go into the country and force Guaido in. So, what do you think should be the role of the United States in this crisis?
Well, here's the thing. I think everything that people have been saying that should have been done since the Chavez era, which has just been sanctioned the shit out of them, hasn't been working because they've still been sanctioned, and there's still, like, whatever funds are entering the country in terms of aid and in terms of, economic imports, even cash in general, is all being disproportionately, given to government officials and Maduro loyalists. And the military who are Maduro loyalists, and not the paramilitary factions that are, not aligned with the Maduro regime. So it's not like they're functioning right now in order to benefit the Venezuelan people. It's just self-preservation at this point. I think there's only one thing left to do, even though I am vehemently against it, and that is military intervention, and I think that is really, really dicey territory to get into. Just from a diplomatic standpoint, in terms of a foreign diplomatic standpoint, I don't think countries want the U.S. going into another country again, just, to provide democracy or to swear in a democratically elected leader or whatever. It's going to cost a shit ton of money. It's not something that's going to be done easily. And also, diplomatically, it's going to be very scratchy because I saw a map a few weeks ago showing the countries that support Maduro and his regime and the countries that endorsed Juan Guaido and his presidency. And pretty much most of Central America and Mexico support Maduro. And then there are a lot of countries in South America that also do.
I'm not sure about that. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, most countries in South America support Guaido. Actually, like most of them, except for.
Now okay, Mexico, and then there are a bunch of non-aligned around here, Central America.
So you have the two big ones in let's see the Western Hemisphere, right?
Yeah.
Are Bolivia and Cuba. Those are the two nations that are saying support Maduro. The rest of the Western Hemisphere effectively. Oh, and Uruguay. The rest of the Western Hemisphere has basically said, we either want to call for a dialogue. No, okay, wait, let me rephrase it. The two nations that support Maduro are Cuba and Bolivia. The two nations right now that want to call for a dialogue are Mexico and Uruguay. And then the ones that want to support Guaido are basically the rest of the countries in the Western Hemisphere. Now, if you want to go towards the rest of the world, Russia, Turkey, and China, they're supporting Maduro. Yeah. The European Union is calling for a dialogue.
Mm-hmm. This is an updated map, I think. I just pulled up another map. What, India support Maduro now?
Did we really?
Jesus Christ! Okay, all the countries as of now that are supporting Maduro have now updated to South Africa, India, Iran, Russia, China, Turkey from before, Syria, Bolivia from before, Cuba, which makes sense because U.S.-Cuba relations are very rocky right now.
They're dicey.
Very dicey. And Nicaragua. And that's all of them.
It's quite a shit show. If the U.S. were to invade, most of Latin America would be on their side. At the same time, it would be a mess. Like, what are you going to have? A caretaker government? I mean, technically, if you think about it, you do have a caretaker government. You just have the National Assembly. You have the National Assembly and Guaido as president. That's all you need to do. You need to remove... I say that's all you need to do, like it's a very easy task. Maduro would be ousted. He would probably be held on an international tribunal, or, you could discuss what you want to do with him. Guaido would immediately become acting president until new elections can be held, and the National Assembly would retain its position. Because the reason that Guaido was even able to come into power was because it said that, the leader of the National Assembly, as per the Venezuela Constitution, should be the person made the president if the president is not doing his job. Mm-hmm. But the only way to enforce that sort of thing is through military action, and I'm not sure we want to go into Latin America, declare war. We wouldn't even be declaring war on Venezuela, would we? We'd just be saying we are doing this to enforce democracy and just bomb the ever-living hell out of Venezuela?
I just don't think there's a way out of this, especially because in the past 2 decades, especially since the Iraq War, Americans have been growingly isolationist, and they've been growingly skeptical of the U.S.'s role militarily in other countries, because we've gone into Afghanistan, we've gone into Iraq, we've built many bases around many parts of the Middle East that are historically not the biggest allies, or at least there are reservations about the U.S.'s role in foreign policy, such as Turkey, and then Saudi Arabia. They controversially built military bases around Mecca.
Yeah.
So that was it's left a bad taste in the mouth of a lot of people. I mean, a lot of countries around the world, and even American citizens, left or right. I mean, growing more isolationist by the day. So I just don't think that this move to militarily intervene in Venezuela is going to be backed by a lot of parties.
I'm not sure about that. The funniest thing is, though, since so many nations are backing up, we're finally on the side where every nation agrees on. This isn't like the Iraq War, which kind of started this entire isolationist movement, or wishes from countries for the United States to stop intervening. Where the Iraq War, we had basically no countries backing us up except for Poland, as President Bush said. Right now, we have a bunch of countries that support our decision. The United Kingdom and Canada would almost automatically be on our side. So would Australia, I'd assume. So the decision would be unpopular. It would be, it wouldn't be unpopular. It would be very controversial. But I think it would be the necessary decision. I think that maybe not a full-on military intervention, but doing what we did in Libya, supporting any military governors or military generals that want to support Guaido. As soon as the military itself decides what it wants to do, that's when the U.S. can jump in.
I think Libya is really different, and Libya is one of the reasons why people really didn't like Obama's foreign policy, either Republicans and Democrats here, like anyone foreign policy-wise, because in Libya the main contention was that Muammar Gaddafi, the then leader of Libya, was starting to form, nuclear capabilities there. Yeah. And
they were in the middle of the civil war.
Yeah,
we should note that.
Yeah,
Libya was already in a state of civil war. Right now, there are a lot mass protests, but the military is still under Maduro's control.
Exactly. Yeah, and basically, continuing on from that, in Libya, what happened was that the Obama administration basically told Gaddafi, hey, stop making nuclear weapons and just disarm.
Can you not?
It's basically do the same thing South Africa did, and I think it was the early to mid 1990s where they completely disarmed in a nuclear manner. Lots of countries in the West lifted sanctions that lasted from the apartheid era as a result of that racist policy all the way until the fact that they disarmed their nuclear capabilities. And Gaddafi said, all right, fine, I'm going to disarm. I'm not going to make any nuclear weapons. And despite that, the U.S. directly intervened in the Libyan civil war in what turned out to be the Arab Spring that completely destabilized the Libyan government. And to this day, it's been overrun by jihadi extremists.
Yeah, Libya, as it is right now, it still does not have a centralized government. So
Libya could be a case study, and one of the reasons why people don't want the U.S. going into another country. That's the thing.
No, I think Libya is the definitive reason. We took a bunch of actions in Libya, and the two big things is we went to Iraq. We had military action. We overthrew the government, and then we put in our own government. Yeah. We got screwed over there. We went to Libya. We overthrew their government. We did not put in our own government. We basically helped the existing factions make a new government, and then that government collapsed. Mm-hmm. So the biggest fear here is, what do we do? Once we go in, what's going to happen? Here's the thing, though, right? Maduro is not automatic, as it is right now, as we stand. Maduro has not completely consolidated power. There is still the National Assembly, right? Mm-hmm. Maduro can't just go out and arrest Guaido. If you were to do that, then all hell would break loose. Yeah. What can happen right now, right, is if the United States goes in, all we do is oust Maduro, and then we install Guaido. That would be the game plan. You don't install your own government. You don't restructure the government. All you do, the entire purpose of U.S. military intervention would be to remove Maduro. The only way that can really occur is if you have a state of conflict to begin with. So if the military generals turn on Maduro, then it would be very easy for the U.S. to say, okay, this is our moment to act. But until then, it's kind of hard to say, because who would we be acting upon? If we bomb the military right now, then that definitely destroys any chance of them turning to our side.
Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense. I mean, especially when you're trying to cooperate with the Venezuelan military, because you can't just bypass them and trying to overthrow Maduro. So, who do you know who to trust? Who do you know who not to trust? How do you not, how do you think that this isn't going to be another Bay of Pigs situation minus the nuclear ramifications? And we tried a similar thing in Somalia as well. That resulted in Black Hawk Down. There was a military warlord, I forgot what his name was. His son actually runs the country now, or at least is a warlord now, and he was actually educated in the U.S. I remember that. We studied in global studies all the way back in junior high school. Yeah, so basically we tried to overthrow that warlord and install a U.S.-friendly leader. Now, he could have been a warlord too, it's just that he was U.S.-friendly. But everyone and their mother in Somalia was armed. They all had guns, and they all killed as many U.S. soldiers as they could possibly find. Now, I don't think it's the same case in Venezuela because, the core tenet of, socialism in a lot of these countries is government take guns. And when that happens, people in Venezuela, there's absolutely no civil uprisings. They're all just starving. They just don't know what. There's actually a horrific video I saw a couple of days ago on Instagram. It showed a bunch of thugs on the street killing a pro-Guaido political actor in his house. It showed him killing him. It showed two guys shooting at least 6 or 7 bullets.
Goddamn.
There, and it was just. I mean, that just shows you the socio-political ramifications of this government and past governments on Venezuela, honestly.
So, as of right now, as of 2017, the number of privately owned firearms is estimated to be at just below 6 million. But I'm pretty sure Venezuela passed a ban on gun ownership. Sean, can you look that up mad quick to see if Venezuela has banned any guns? But, this is a kind of textbook example. The government's becoming authoritarian, kind of the moment to overthrow them. This is an absolutely extreme example, and the really extreme examples are the only... Okay, so they banned private gun ownership in 2012.
Yeah, but the amount
So this is including both illicit and illicit, so that includes illegal gun
the black market. When you ban something, price floor dramatically increases, and thus the black market demand that's not regulated by the government dramatically increases. You have incredibly high price guns might be one of the most prized commodities in Venezuela right now.
I'm not sure if this would when this escalates, right?
Yeah.
Because right now this is the simmering point. Once this escalates, once it reaches a boil, I'm not sure it's going to be the civilians that instigate it. I think it's going to be generals that flip over to the civilian side, and then they're the ones that actually lead any armed conflict.
I think that's the most viable option because they're the ones that actually have arms and they're the ones that can actually carry out this sort of attack. The problem is you don't know who from the military is anti-Maduro and pro-Maduro to the point that, it's very illicit at this point in time. Take what happened in Turkey, the attempted military coup that happened, I think it was in 2017.
I want to say 2016, but you might be right. I'm pretty sure it's 2016.
Okay, yeah, 2016 or 2017. So basically, in the Turkish military coup, there were the Turkish military, which is not just under Erdogan, but historically in Turkey, since the days of Kemal Mustafa Ataturk, the military has always been the upholder of democratic Western principles in Turkey. And whenever a leader has gone more to the dictatorial side or more to the fundamentalist side when it came to the upholding of Sharia law and Islamic principles in Turkey, the military always acted against those people. Erdogan has basically become that type of leader, especially in the way that he's become more authoritarian, and they try to overthrow him.
There's a lot of belief that Erdogan himself staged the coup.
Oh, it was 2016.
And I'm almost a subscriber to that. It was 2016. I'm a subscriber to the idea that in some way Erdogan basically organized this coup so that he would have more of a mandate. Now, the reason that's an entire other thing, but the reason for that is basically every single other coup has been so flawless, so successful, and it's happened so immediately. This one seemed way too unorganized or disorganized compared to the military's history with us. The military in Turkey is known for this. This is the military's biggest job, and they failed at it, unlike they've ever done in history. And they've done this numerous times.
And also there was a massive power grab afterwards from Erdogan, which is basically backs up the point that you said maybe Erdogan staged this entire thing in order to consolidate more power, which he has more than ever before, more than any president in Turkey's history. But
Going back to Venezuela, how can
there's every chance it happens in Venezuela. That's what I'm saying. It's very, very tough to pinpoint the perfect strategy in order to uphold democracy and any form of economic stability.
But
and
I think the only way to back up for both of those, the only way for that to happen is for there to be Guaido, because you can't have Maduro run the economy. Otherwise, Maduro would have fixed the economy by now.
Yeah. What does irk me though is in a lot of left-wing circles, at least in the U.S., people are very anti-Guaido only because they think that Guaido is an instrument to allow the U.S. to invade Venezuela, and they're very isolationist since the days of the Iraq War and the war in Afghanistan.
That's a really dumb. By the way, I'm like checking myself out in the mirror because I got a haircut and I'm really self-conscious about it.
Amazing.
So I'm like walking back and forth in this dorm right now. But going back to a lot of liberals, and I understand this because it's happened a lot in U.S. history, are saying this is just the most recent in a long line of events where the United States government will go into Latin or South America, overthrow a government, and install a government that's more loyal or accountable to the United States government. I get that, right? But this was an action taken directly by Venezuela's, essentially the legitimate Supreme Court of Venezuela, which is the Supreme Court in absentia, in exile. They are the ones that decided that Guaido should be president, and then everything that happened afterwards were nations backing up that decision, right? Mm-hmm. It's not like we went out of our way and said we handpicked him and said you should be the president, or you should be the president, right? It's not like what we did in Iran, for example, where we went into Iran and we installed our own guy. They decided that that this should be the person. A lot of people are protesting in favor of Guaido, and what we're basically saying is the Supreme Court has spoken, the people are speaking, let Guaido lead. So this argument that a lot of liberals are saying, or a lot of the left at least is saying, that or it's really just the fringe groups. I think a lot of major leaders in the United States, but a lot of the fringe groups are saying, we shouldn't support Guaido. You're ignoring the fact that this wasn't us taking the initial action. This was Venezuela's institutions, legitimate institutions, taking the actions. We're basically just providing external support. We're providing international support.
It's like the Lend-Lease Act before World War II.
It's like the Lend-Lease Act of politics, right? It's like, okay, you've decided this, we're not going to come in a military body for you, but we're going to provide as much political pressure as we can on you.
Yeah.
We've had sanctions, we've had political pressure. I'm not sure when it's going to... Maybe this all just boils over, maybe the military comes in, maybe Maduro steps down. I think that's very unlikely. Like the last time a political leader has stepped down in such a high... peacefully, in such a high incident like this, in such a tense situation, two times. One time there was the head of state or head of government for some European country that happened right after the Panama Papers, like within a month of the Panama Papers. He had resigned in Europe.
Yeah.
And then the only other time would be at the very beginning of the Arab Spring, when the Tunisian government was successfully made democratic. Very peacefully. You had protests, you had some deaths, but relatively peacefully, especially when you compare to what was happening throughout all the other Middle Eastern countries.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that sort of democratic turnover is going to occur within Venezuela, which is why I'm an advocate of having some sort of military support. Not necessarily like, we have to invade Venezuela, but like, if the generals act, if the military acts, the United States has a very clear side as to who they should be supporting.
That's a good point.
That's just about all I got, Sean. You got anything else you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, I guess I'll take it from here. So... Today we talked about the national emergency declared by President Trump earlier today, as well as the crisis in Venezuela and our proposed solutions. And even though there wasn't really anything that can be said perfectly in order to sum up how we can solve the situation, while Bilal checks his hair out.
Yo, facts!
Facts!
There's facts.
There's always a lot that can be done in the future, and there's always a lot of news that's waiting to be unraveled.
Wait, but Sean, just for the podcast viewers, and for me, how does my hair look, Sean?
Pretty fly, my guy.
Thank you, Sean.
That even
Then wrap us up, Sean.
All right, that was it for today's episode of Real Talk with Shan and Bilal. And it has been a long while since we've last uploaded, but we're going to get this one up, and we're going to have a regular upload schedule I somehow said that without laughing in between, but we're gonna try to do
We
it.
always say that. We always say, "Oh yeah, this is the last time that we don't know. You guys don't know. We don't know." That's the fun of the podcast. It's a Friday surprise. That's what it is.
Also, if it's too slow, just play it at 1.25 speed sometimes. That's all I'm gonna say.
Facts.
Okay, so thank you and good night.